They say the human soul weighs 21 grams. So then how much of that is fueled by creativity? How much weight do the elements that comprise this creativity hold? This is the show that welcomes those questions, and luckily we have the guests to answer them here today. Welcome to 21 Grams.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Grams, and it's so awesome to be here. We're back after a little bit of a hiatus, and I'm really pleasantly surprised to have a master of his craft here with us today, Mr. Reid. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, sir, before we get started.
Hi, I publish as JMD Reid, but you can call me James. I lived in the Pacific Northwest most of my life. I am a epic and dark fantasy author. I have published 15 books, and I got another 3 coming out this year, and next year will be the launch of my 12-book epic fantasy series, Shadow of the Dragons. So that will be really big and exciting. So I've been writing fantasy like pretty full-time since 2013.
Nice.
That's kind of when I got into it, and yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I would like to kind of veer the questions toward the idea of what you create, because you're so unique in the prospect of how you create series and bring series about, and I'm kind of curious to start off with. I'm going to ask the obvious, simple question, which is, what comes first? Is it the story, then the world, or is it the world and then the story?
It's the story, then the world. Unless I do have a universe that I plan on putting a lot of stories in, so that's going to be a little different. So that'll be stories that will fit the world. But generally, it's an idea that I have, and then I create the world to fit that idea that I can use to tell that story. So for Shadow of the Dragon, my upcoming project, I wanted to have a traveling story where they go across a lot of the world and they see a lot of crazy stuff. So I needed a world that had a lot of crazy, fantastical things for them to come across. So that was kind of the idea I had when I sat down and did the world building. I didn't really have an idea what a lot of that fantastical stuff would be. So I just kind of, I would put weird things on the map and give them weird names that were kind of like inspiration. Like I called a place like the Shadow of Death, which we sadly don't really get to see. Like they kind of see it for like a chapter, sadly. But that's just how the story worked out. But that's what I would do. I just drop evocative names onto the map and see what they inspired me to create to fit those evocative names, and maybe what would be cool for the characters to go see and visit and stuff like that.
When you're developing a story, are you fully developing it from beginning to the absolute end, or just that one story within that one book that leads to the next story?
Well, they always start with usually an idea. For Shadow of the Dragon, I had for many years this idea of a kid that liked a girl whose father was very abusive, and he would go and save her, but her father was also an evil warlock. And so that was kind of this germ of a story that was rattling around the back of my head. And that's kind of the inciting incident of Shadow of the Dragon, of the entire series, is going to save his childhood friend from her abusive father as he's conducting a ritual on behalf of a much larger organization that has plans on changing the world and upsetting status quo, and bringing about sort of the downfall of the gods and the false temples. And this ritual is a very key component of it, and he just messed it up just on the simple principle he doesn't want to see his friend getting hurt any longer, and he just kind of could no longer just stand by and not do anything about it, and thus sets into motion a 12-book epic fantasy series.
You know, a lot of what we experience in humanity seems to play a lot in heavy in your themes. You know, like you have, for example, a series about the masks we wear, and a series about climate change and the weather, and how people deal with weather events and things of that nature, and the storm riders and that idea. And I'm kind of curious for you, is that something that you help to develop your characters? Is that something that really grounds them and makes them authentic for you, or and are you hoping for the reader, or is it something that you're trying to do to kind of just give it a thematic event and give it some kind of texture?
Well, I'm not one of those authors that think of theme first. I discover theme as I write the story, and I find that my subconscious will weave the theme more through the books. I tend to think about the character and what sort of traumas that they have had in their lives and what they need to overcome, for their own psychological well-being, to improve as a character, or what will, destroy them, for other characters. And so first and foremost, I want to tell like very human stories. They just happen to be set in awesome, fantastic worlds.
Nice. So, I mean, so when you've developed the theme, though, is it something that you're really keying in on, or does that help the world building process at all for you, or is it just an aspect of natural storytelling?
For me, it's just something I develop naturally, organically through the story. So, like Shadow the Dragon developed the theme of sacrifice, and it wasn't something I had ever planned. Because again, the ritual is, I didn't think about the ritual, but the ritual was a sacrifice of the daughter, basically to put one of the dead dragon souls into her, and she would be erased if the ritual was completed. And so he would be sacrificing her. Now, there's another character who is sort of my enemy. Like, she's the character that's sent in by the organization to figure out what happened, right? Like the ritual, all 6 of these rituals were supposed to take place on this one night where there's a conjunction between the 2 moons. And 5 of them reported in. Why didn't this guy report in? So they sent her to go figure it out. And I'm coincidentally in her backstory. So I wanted to know, like, why does she not like the gods, right? What is her beef? Why is she with the apostasy, as they're called? And that was because she was an orphan. She was taken in by the temple of Tzoji, who is the goddess of, I call her Earthblood, but that's the goddess of sort of volcanic activity. And, and there's a volcano right next to where she lives. And when it got active, this lady that raised her, who she thought of as her mother, was like, well, you're very special, and we're going to take you up onto this volcano, and we're going to throw you into it to appease our goddess. And she gets rescued by an apostate member, and that's sort of like, so that's it. She has this vast betrayal. And I realized like her vast betrayal was because she was going to be sacrificed, and now she's hunting someone that is going to be sacrificed by the group she works for. And so it becomes a very central character conflict for her. It wasn't something I planned, right? It was something I discovered, but I just coincidentally gave her a backstory that fit into this whole theme of sacrifice. And it kept going because there was the first book, the girl doesn't like the fact that her friend is risking everything, because he doesn't have a stake in this, right? He could just stand by and let her get captured or anything like that. Instead, he's risking his life, and she doesn't want him to die for her. So she doesn't want him to sacrifice himself for her, right? And right. He's a 16-year-old boy who's like drinking in stories of like heroes doing heroic stuff. So he's all totally gung-ho about this stuff. So he's a 16-year-old boy who thinks he's invincible, who's just going to go like, no, I can do this. Let's go, right? He's way over his head, but he's got that brashness that only a stupid teenager can have. Who doesn't know like the consequences of these sort of actions, that hasn't had that sort of maturity because he hasn't lived enough. So, but yeah, so it's like I just discovered it, and it keeps going, and it's going to be integral to the ending of the series, like this whole theme of sacrifice, and when is sacrifice a good thing? When is it a bad thing? When is it right? When it's wrong? It's all that stuff is all built into it. And I didn't plan it. but I discovered it, and I'm really glad I did, because I think it has some very ethical and moral debates between characters over the course of the series.
Yeah, it sounds like for you, as an epic fantasy writer, good and evil, dark and light play a huge role in creating journeys in epic fantasy usually. And some of your books, they're really defined dark and light. But this sounds like more like you're blurring the lines a little bit more than normal. Is this an evolution of your writing? Is this something that you've always wanted to explore, or do you feel like there is blurring throughout all of this, and discovering dark and light is more of what it's about than it is being stark with it?
I would say that I'm always very black and white on the morality.
Uh-huh.
There are things that are good, there are things that are bad, and my characters, on the other hand, can be very gray. They can bounce between them. They can make mistakes. They can do bad things for good reasons. They can do good things for bad reasons, and
Right.
And so I try to write very human characters. I very rarely have characters that would be like, I don't write a lot of paragons necessarily, and I don't also write a lot of like just absolute moral reprehensible characters. There are a few. I have written a few that are just, they're very twisted and dark and had very disgusting upbringings, and that drove them into like areas, there are areas of sadism and sociopathy that do crop up, right? I mean, sort of like the serial killer type people that have zero empathy for humans and are only after their own pleasure. And so I do have characters like that because, I mean, that is a part of humanity, that there are people that just don't have that
Right.
empathy and what it can do to them. But mostly my villains are they're people who are doing what they think is right, but it's the wrong way to go about it. Maybe it's the easy way. Maybe they're just disillusioned by the world. Maybe they don't know any better, but that puts them into conflict with my characters, like my heroes and stuff.
Connecting a series can kind of be tricky. So, I mean, do when you're going through each book and trying to figure out where you're going to the next one and where you're starting and stopping and all of these things, and then you're developing themes as they go along, and you're putting your characters in the chessboard placement of the world and everything like that, and then of course obviously making the world a part of it as well. I'm kind of curious from you what you avoid, what you look at when you're an avid reader just as much as you are an avid writer. So looking at fantasy series and what they've done and haven't done, are there certain things, certain tropes, certain ideas that you avoid to kind of move your series along? Or is there a more organic approach for you in that respect?
I do what I think the story needs.
Uh-huh.
I try to avoid cliches, but
Yeah.
like tropes I'm not afraid of tropes. Tropes are just basic story ideas that we all understand. It's a language, and like any language, you can use it badly or you can use it well, and I hope I use it well. And some people might disagree and others don't, but yeah, that's so I don't necessarily go like, I just try to do what I think is necessary for the story and true to the characters. Mainly that's my main focus, is being true to the characters and hoping that they are consistent and following their story arcs and are making decisions that make sense based off their past experience and stuff.
How important are the magical systems to you, and defining them and creating them and putting them all together? How much time do you spend on making them make sense?
I spend quite a bit of time on them. Yeah, I spent the magic systems of all my worlds are all I try to do more hard magic versus soft magic. So I will trail into soft magic. Soft magic has a very almost like divine quality to it, where it's something like soft magic kind of transcends the physical, whereas like most of my magic is very practical stuff that has it can be very common. It's very in-universe purpose. to it. It's almost not even seen as magic by the people. But obviously it is. So, and then I try to give them rules, and I try to stay consistent. I try to do things that don't break the rules of my magic system. That makes sense with it.
Do you think magic plays more of a role for the characters, the world, the themes? Where do you think magic really, really defines itself in your writing?
Magic is baked really into the world building.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, the magic has to, like, the world has to make sense. That a world with this sort of magic, there has to be, like, they have to be organic together. So, like, the world and the magic have to be married. And then it's just determining which characters are using it, and or learning it, or who has access to it and stuff like that. But like the fundamentals of the magic system have to be baked into the world building, into the history of the world, and all that stuff.
I'm also curious how I mean, it's not, but there's some that, Dune and some others that have used weather as it's kind of an interesting idea in world building, and with the Storm Riders series, it seems like weather is the main element of what you're trying to accomplish, or center around. So, I mean, what challenges did you find with incorporating weather into a fantasy world? Was that kind of a difficult process for you, or did you think it was rather easy and it was helpful in world building?
Well, so the weather, I mean, the storm below, it's called the storm below for a reason. The storm is like the central defining thing in that world.
Right.
It covers the entire face of the world, and above it are floating islands, and below it is a mystery. The people who live on those floating islands, they used to live down there. There was a time before the storm existed, but they've lived like 2,000 years above it. They don't know what's really down there, other than the fact that they're these, like, the storm riders are down there. The storm riders are like monsters to them, boogeymen that just attack without warning, in giant cyclones that sweep over your lands with the force of hurricanes. And on top of that, they have like marauders that will hack and kill and mess you up in there. And they have a goal, and no one knows what their goals are. They're very much a mystery because they're separated, by the storm. And so that's very important. And so and there's also other stuff like weather control is very important. Like, you see, like, most of the islands, like where there's farming, they control the weather. So there's not an issue with, like, this place doesn't get enough rainfall, or this place gets too much, because they control it. So weather is very much it. And the magic system of that universe is all weather based. So there are 4 different flavors of the magic system, which is mist, pressure, wind, and lightning. So they're the 4 elements, but they're with like a weather twist. So lightning's like fire, and pressure's earth, and mist is water, and wind is air. So that was kind of how I came about the magic system. So everyone can get access to that. Like, they randomly get access to one of the 4, basically, when you become an adult. And they're all they're very baked into the world. So, like, kind of what your future is very much determined by which blessings you get. Kind of like can really chart the course of your life. And they have magical engines that need someone with a blessing to activate. So that's how the ships work. That's how the weather control towers work, and all that stuff.
And I know you're creating a whole new world, and this is a world you've created in the past. But I just find it fascinating because it's an interesting way to go about creating a fantasy series. It's something that has been explored, but it really hasn't centered around a world like you did with this series, and so it's very fascinating to me, the idea of because we always are told there's no new way to approach story. Story is story, but there is ways to make it your own. Was that kind of the idea for you in creating a series like that? It was kind of,
Yeah.
I want to make it stand out as something different.
I was very much inspired by Margaret Wise and Tracy Hickman's Deathgate cycle.
Yeah.
And they have a world called Uranus, and it's not my world, but it is flying islands.
Uh-huh.
There is a storm, but it's not quite the same as my storm.
Right.
But it is very much a world that is so. When I first read it, I had never read books that had a world that was so alien to ours. It was so different. Like this would have been like 13-year-old me was going like, oh wow, what is this? This is crazy. And then they had other crazy worlds too. But it was very much, it always lingered in my mind just how great that was. That and you really didn't see it. Like, I mean, you look at like what are the really huge hitters in epic fantasy, and they have worlds that are very grounded in our own. Like the Wheel of Time is, it's got magic, but it's, the world itself is nothing special.
Right.
I mean, George R. R. Martin's world is a little weird with its weather. Like there's something really crazy with that weather going on in his world. But other than that, like the world feels very normal. Other than it has some weird seasonal stuff that doesn't make any sense. I don't know what explanation he has behind it. I've read so many crazy theories about it. Like, but
I think it's all trying to find what we know a little bit.
Yeah. So it's grounding. It's easier.
Yeah.
I mean, I made like the Storm Below. One of the things I did was like all the islands like I lifted up were places that didn't have metal, and then I'm like, I kept having to run the issue of like, right, they don't have metal. So like they use. I mean, the Japanese have a whole like architecture style that they don't use nails.
Right.
They figured out how to put buildings together without nailing them or bolting them or anything.
Right.
So there's that, and so I was like, well, they must have to like develop ceramics, and there's some other ways they got around. So they had to innovate, but it was kind of like there's a reason why the parts of the world that don't have metal kind of were lifted up. There's like it was a reason, so I didn't just do it. But it was like one of the things that I kept running into it because I would like the guy has a crazy dream state gets, and like he sees this being that's bound in chains of lightning, but he doesn't know what chains are. You don't really make chains out of anything but metal, right? Which they just have rope. You don't need to like rope you braid. You don't need to like make links that you connect together. So it was just weird stuff. I wanted to call like the hours like bells, and then I realized like, wait, they don't know they wouldn't have bells, so they wouldn't call the hours. So I had to come up with some new name because I was like, I don't want to call them hour. But I think I've gotten more like where I'm just like, now I'm just gonna call stuff hours nowadays instead of making up some like new term for it. On my 6th fantasy world, what do I call an hour? No, I'm just
yeah. It's little things like that. I have to imagine too the topography had to be kind of interesting. Creating a map for a world like this and creating textures, especially knowing that there's not metal involved and what you can and can't use in that respect, and how big these places must be and small, and what the storm creates below it. I mean, all of those things for map building and topography changes everything, right? And that, so were you really precise in how you were like pinpointing those kind of things, and how much of that mattered to the story itself?
Very little.
Yeah,
I did. I have them. They're skylands, and the bigger ones have little mountain ranges and lakes, and but most of them are really small. They're like you can walk across them in 2 days easily for most of them. They're not very big places. There's a lot of empty space between them. I want there to be like really vast empty spaces between a lot of them. So there'd be like clusters, but there'd also be vast like sky seas of just nothing. You could sail for days and not see a thing. And I had to create a whole ecology. So there's a whole ecology of like fish that fly through the sky and stuff like that. And there's floating krill to support them. So there's sort of like this whole like ecology that's created to like allow them to survive, to replace things that they didn't have. So yeah, there's a lot of it's fun because like most people like they find out like because a lot of people don't ever see lakes because you only have lakes on the really big islands, and so like the idea of like a boat that floats on water is weird, or fish that live in water is strange because you do find those in like the actual lakes, like real normal fish, and also there's like that. So yeah, there's like a lot of fun, interesting stuff. But like no, I didn't really like the most of the books take place on ships that are flying over stuff, and so there was the topography below the storm was very important.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that later on,
Right, because nobody knows what it is, right? So
not the people. Well, at one point, some of our characters are going to end up beneath it. So and I had to know what that was like, and so it's kind of it's well, I mean, just imagine what the world would be like with a storm over it forever that's raining all the time. It's not pleasant.
Where I live right now, we've kind of had that aspect of it for the last couple of days.
Yeah, right? it's like an endless swamp.
Yeah,
what it is down there, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Nasty. Yeah. It's nasty down there. And I have like a book where there's an entire like where I think like a half of the book is down below that in that, and it's completely different. So it's like above the storm is all like flying over and the dangers of like things falling up, but that one is just like dealing with endless terrible weather, like miserable weather. And yeah,
in self-discovery too for these characters, how important is senses then? Do you play a lot with the sensory elements?
I try to remember like scents and smells and stuff like that, and touch and stuff. I try to put that stuff in there. It makes things more real. It's a piece of advice I was given when I was early on in my writing by Valerie Hamlin. She was like, don't forget, like, your characters need to smell what the world's like. So I try to remember to put those details. And sometimes I have characters that I have some like lizard characters, and they're they taste the air. So I got to remember they taste things. That's in my current series where he's like he tastes stuff, and I also like to do weird races. I got plant race in my current books, and they part of a lot of their communication. So like our communication, we have a lot of like nonverbal stuff, right? Their nonverbal isn't like facial expressions; it's pheromones that they release. So it's like completely lost on humans, and the facial expressions are kind of completely lost on them. So there's that. So that's always fun because when I write them, I have to like remember to like that. They're always releasing what their emotions are. So they're very bad liars, at least to their own race, because they can't really control. They can to an extent, but they can't produce a feeling an emotion they're not feeling, right? So it's kind of
Vulcan-esque,
right? And there can be a lot of unspoken stuff where like the characters are just like, one character's afraid, and so their fear is filling the air, and that's like affecting the other character because they're smelling that fear, and it's causing their body to react. This like trees do, right? Trees are like, oh no, I'm being infested by these bugs, and I release a pheromone to let the other trees know that, hey, start upping your tannin production because we're getting attacked, right? That's kind of was like the idea behind some of their race. And so I always have to remember to include stuff like that when I'm writing from their POVs. And then I have the character that can smell, like, taste things, and he can sort of taste it. He doesn't really know what they mean. So it's fun stuff.
That's awesome. So he's kind of describing it to us, but discovering it on his own.
He's just like his taste isn't quite good enough for they're very like shades, right? They have a very like they're very good at like very nuanced like pheromones that are very complicated. They would be very complicated like aldehydes and sugars and there's another type that I'm blanking on my organic chemistry because it's been 20 years since I took it. So, but yeah, so like that, they're very sharp at that. So, but they make them fun. I really like my plant characters.
Nice, that's awesome. I'm curious too. For you as you develop these series and go forward, now you're 4 books, 3 books, 12 books. And you look at this, are you using less and less of the world building that you're doing in these stories, or has it become more?
It's more like I know that what I'm going to need for my world building. So I'm more focused on it. Whereas my Storm Below, I produced a lot of world building, way too much world building on stuff that never mattered, and so it was a lot of, and so I kind of was scaling it back where I'm more like I only will develop like the really heavy world building if it's really going to be important for the story, or if I need it for other parts. But like, and so, yeah, I kind of just scaled it back because I just kind of learned that like, I'm not going to need it, right? Kind of sort of the thing. And so like I do heavy world building on like where we're going or where characters are from, and then everything else is very shallow. Like I could do enough to like, I'll drop names or references to stuff, but like yeah, because it would be boring to put all that in there, and then I find it just wasn't a good use of my time to go into that much in depth because I'm not going to put out an encyclopedia of the world.
Yeah.
So it's fine.
Have people asked you for that?
No.
Most fantasy readers understand that, right? I mean, it's kind of, and I think a lot of people want to leave to their imagination in some respects too. Do you feel that way as a fantasy reader?
Yeah, that's like I'm fine. Like I want to get what like is necessary for the story. And like in the Shadow of the Dragon, I go to a lot of different places, so I get it's a very, very different places, and I try to give each place its own sort of character and like things that make sense for it.
How important is it for to a story that the world evolves as much as the characters do, or is the burden solely on the characters to evolve the story in the world?
Well, yeah, I mean, like I do changes to the world if necessary. I think the Storm Below has really the most. Because I do some pretty cataclysmic stuff to that world. By the time we get to the end of it, that I haven't needed to do for other series. I mean, like what I wrote after the Storm Below is very local scale. So like, we had the Jewels of Illumination takes place mostly in a city for all 5 of its books, and Masks of Illumination takes place in 2 cities. So, and so like the first couple books are in one city and the last couple of books are in the other city, basically. And so they're very focused. So there's not a lot, I'm not doing things that are on the scale of world destruction, but the worlds like kind of do like the little individual worlds kind of evolve, and change, like the status quo is like the politics and the society and stuff like that changes in those books.
Do what the humans do to it evolve it as well?
Yeah. I mean, so like Cash has like a pollution issue because it's industrializing. So that's in Jewels of Illumination. So it's kind of a very filthy city.
Yeah.
Because it's got a lot of like factories that belch smog, and it's London basically. It's a London analog. So it gets it can get the yellow like fog, the sort of poison fog that London used to get, because of all the coal dust in the air and stuff like that. And it has a river that's fairly polluted. Like you don't want to drink from it if you can avoid it. So like so that's like all man-made effect on this sort of place, because and then other, that's So people definitely have impact on the world because of course they do. That's what we do.
Yeah, and that makes sense. That helps. I mean, that's just natural evolution at that point, then, right? So, and then maybe not so much with the story, but it just kind of gives it that little extra, right? That the story can kind of play around with.
Yeah.
All right, you ready to do some rapid fire questions?
Sure.
All right. All right, James. Character that changed your world for the better.
Ari, Storm Below.
Nice. Setting you could live in that you created.
Jewels of Illumination setting.
Setting you would never ever want to even visit that you created.
Storm Below.
Creature you haven't used yet that you would like to in a book or a story.
That's the Great Unclean Beast, which is I'm going to use it. I just haven't used it yet.
Nice. Your favorite death of all time in any fantasy world, not your own.
Oh boy. I'm on the spot here. I'm trying to think. There's so many great deaths. Oh God, I'm blanking on them. They're like on the tip of my tongue. Duncan, Idaho Doom.
Okay, all right. Your
I
favorite
just
name?
watched that movie. So it's
Nice,
fresh in my mind.
nice. So your favorite name you've created in your works for a town or village or a territory?
The Autonomy of Lesbian.
Nice. That's awesome. I love that. Weapon you haven't used yet, but you think you might at some point.
That's a good one. There's some crazy stuff I could do in the Shadow of the Dragon. I think it's something to do with the volcanic magic. It's called Earth Blood. That could like maybe fire like molten lava at somebody. That might be interesting.
Character that's most like you, the person that we're looking at right now, that you've created.
I think Ari probably has the most of me. He at least has my temper. That's about it.
Do you spend most of your time thinking about where the series begins or where it ends?
I'm always thinking about where it's going because I've already written where it began, so that's the past. I'm focused on where I need to get it to go.
Your favorite element you like to use in your worlds?
I think I like to use storms.
Nice.
I got 2 fantasy worlds that have storms.
Yeah, I would say that's probably true. Are you someone who keeps a daily word count, or do you go until you can't go anymore? How's your writing style with these usually go?
I just said that. So like with my fantasy writing, I wanted to work on it 3 hours a day. And that's whether it's writing or editing. I just set a timer, and then I just stop when the timer goes off. Not 3 hours in one stretch. Like an hour. I'll do an hour at a time.
Yeah. I would imagine you have to get up at some point and at least pee or walk around, get some feeling back in the legs, right?
Yeah. That's definitely true.
All right, we're done with the rapid. You can expand if you'd like. Move on more stuff. Along those lines of the way you write and how you write it, how quickly are you knowing when the story's going to begin and end? Do you have a feeling for that right off the bat, or do you just let it take you where it's going to take you, or do you make sure that if you have something that you might have like a rough idea of, that you follow through with it? I mean, where's your process in how many books are going to be created from what you're doing and how you're doing it?
Okay, so up until the Shadow of the Dragon, I really wasn't sure how long it was going to be. That one was kind of it's going to be as long as it needs to be. But like Storm Below, I just felt like 5 books. I don't know why. I really didn't know how I was going to end it. It just felt like 5 books felt very right, and it turned out to be right. Jewels of Illumination, Mask of Guild, 5 books also just felt right for what I wanted to do with them. Assassins, which is coming out this later this year and like next month. Assassins of Illumination. That one felt like 3 books. Like I knew what the story was, and I didn't feel like I was going to get more than 3 books out of the premise to tell like the story that I wanted to tell about this shape-changing assassin trying to get his life back after he got freed from being the pawn of the bad guys of the previous series. So,
is there characters that you've explored or you've created throughout the series that you know that maybe didn't you think would play a role in the series that you then decide, you know what, I need to write more about this character? Has that happened to you before? Have you felt like that, and does that hurt how you plan your series a little bit?
So I always knew I was going to write about no one. So no one was the idea of no one is something that predated the Illumination Cycle series. But I realized he was like, so I always wanted to write the story about a shape-changing assassin that like lost his memories or whatever, and he had to kind of get his life back.
Mm-hmm.
So this was an idea. And I realized that he would be perfect to have him introduced as a pawn of the villains in Jewels of Illumination. And then when that series was over, he would be free and would get to start that idea of the story. So like I would have an entire book series where you get to see like what this character is, what he does when he's under the control of people. And then now he's free. And now it's him trying to get back to who he was and try to reconnect with his old life. But people want to use him. People want to kill him because they, he killed some people they loved, and so I knew that. But so then I wrote Mass right after I wrote Jewels, and I wrote there's a character in it, and I just kept thinking about what would happen to this character, and what happened was she joined in as the other lead character for Assassins. And her story was her story was perfect for it, because she's on her own sort of like quest of self-discovery, because she was like an agent of the same bad guys who are in Jewels of Illumination, but she was off in a different place doing things there, and it went really bad for her. And she had a whole character arc of like realizing like what she was doing wasn't good, and she made a lot of mistakes. She got someone she like killed, and so she's at the end of it like needing to like, she doesn't know where she belongs anymore, because like her great like leader is gone, her organization is kaput. She did some bad things. She goes back to the main city to kind of figure out what happened and figure out what to do with her life. She's far from home, and she just sort of stumbles into like so like there's the A and B plot of the first Assassin's book. So the A plot is our assassin being targeted by one of the victims, the loved ones of one of his victims, who was this lord who's hired another assassin to kill him. So that's like our A plot. And so most of the book is about that. But the B plot is there's the crime syndicate that survived the last series. They're moving into the power vacuum that was left over by the fallout of their rivals getting taken out. And so they're moving in and they're having their own power plan. And so she stumbles into their plot and is deciding like she kind of feels sort of responsible, as like an ex-member of this group, so she kind of feels a little responsible for some of this fallout. So she just decides to try to stop it, and that brings her, into conflict with our assassin, who, of course, when he gets targeted by this powerful rich guy, the crime syndicate comes to him to kind of offer him protection and try to woo him to their side. So like she fit very nicely, and then that led her into the A plot as she discovers there's this assassin. So it's a very interesting book, and she fit perfectly in it. She was just what it needed to really make this trilogy really work. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I was really happy when I hit upon it.
Right.
But I couldn't like, yeah, it's like after I wrote basically her last scene, which was in book 4, I just kept thinking about what would she do after that, because she kind of had gone through her change of character, and now she would have it, and I just kept in my mind like what would happen to them, and that's how she sort of wound up in there. I couldn't let her go. In fact, that's how Jewels of Illumination came apart. I wrote a short story, and I couldn't let go of the character in it, and so he became the main character of Jewels of Illumination. Was like, I need to know what happened to this guy after the short story. And when Fenori also came from that, so the main character of Masks, also what happened to her. So both those series came out of a short story where I just couldn't let go of what happened to these two characters afterwards. I kept thinking about it.
Now writing an epic 12 book series, or you're on a timeline, you're making this happen. Is there going to be deviations for you in that respect? Do you feel like if something like that were to happen, like in book 4 or 5, would that change your trajectory on what you plan here, or are you going to stay to the course and maybe visit the world a little bit after that? Is that kind of how you approach it anyway?
Well, I'm on book 10, so
okay. So you're already well into it.
I am into my end game now.
Yeah.
For the series at this point.
Nice.
I had a roadmap, kind of like I kind of pictured this journey, and it would go to these sort of places, and that there were certain things they had to do along the way, and things definitely, there were some detours I didn't expect,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm glad. And there's definitely especially the later half of the series wasn't quite so clear as the early half was.
Mm.
So like the first half, so like the first 4 books were all kind of, I had a general idea of what was in them. I didn't think there'd be 4 books, but I did know like they were going to go to these places for and I knew they'd have to go through these other places just because physically they'd have to cross them. So I knew all this stuff. So I had all that stuff like prepared. And then I kind of knew that at one point they were going to get to the far side of the continent. So like in book 2, I set up a ship captain that would meet them on the other end of the continent, because I set up he was going to be going east, right? Just on the sailing stuff. So he would be there for them to meet on the other side of the continent, and that was, so they ran into him at the end of like book 7. So I was like, all right, yeah, cool. And so I had that. So like he was in place. So like I knew I was going to need him eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Because I knew I wanted to get out to this island on the far end of the world. And so like in book 3, so like at the end of book 3, I kind of had like a roadmap of like these are places that they need to go to. Sort of one of the characters is a vision that shows them these locations. And one of them was, of course, the inaccessible place that everyone's trying to get back to that's been cut off by a storm for 3,000 years.
Jeez, it doesn't. You just don't leave it. The storms just follow you wherever they go.
Yeah, no, it's the eternal gale. It just sort of circles the island at the very center of this world. Where like it's paradise. So it's their Eden, and everyone got kicked out of it, obviously, because they were a bunch of bad people that had a war, and that war spread to the rest of the world and left a lot of damage everywhere. But and then they got cut off, so they got cut off from paradise. So they're all trying to get back to paradise.
Nice.
That's sort of the goal of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And like I set up in book 3, like, hey, for you guys to accomplish your mission, you're going to need to go there one day. So that's like been there in the minds of the characters for like since book 3 that they're going to go there. I set up like in book 10 they go to this place called the Blighted Jungles, but I actually started like one of the characters in book 1 in the Blighted Jungles for like 2 chapters. And I knew like this place was going to be somewhere I was going to go and have stuff happen. And so I was mindful of it. I just didn't know the series length. That was kind of what I wasn't sure about. I kind of felt like maybe 10 books, but I kind of wasn't sure. Mm-hmm. And as I got to around book 6, I kind of let out a roadmap of like these events need to be in this book, this book, this book, as like a way to chart myself to my end game. And I stayed faithful to that, even if I shuffled things around in other aspects. But yeah, and so it came out to a 12 books. I felt was kind of what it is. And now that I'm at the end of book 10, I hope I have enough material for 2 more books.
But if it ends at 10, it ends. Well, it's not going to end at 10, but yeah, I mean.
Yeah, my publisher wants it to be increments of divisible by 3.
Yeah, that makes sense.
To sell it to
sets and stuff.
Yeah, so they want that. And so I'm pretty confident that book 12 will be very short or very long. I'm not sure.
I'm curious too. I mean, along the lines of connecting, we've talked a lot about how you connect your writing together, but how much is reading? You do a reading every week. It seems like every Friday or every other Friday. I see you pop up on Facebook doing a reading. How much of that connection has helped you connect not only to your material again, but to your audience? What do you feel like is that a bridge? Is that a gap you're trying to bridge there with that connection and reading it?
Hopefully, I'm just trying to show people the books. It's kind of fun. It's kind of nerve-wracking because especially I'm reading through my first book, and I'm like, man, there's some really dumb stuff in here.
That's always the thing, right? It's like we can't get away from it. We can't get away from our own criticism sometimes.
I was listening to my voice actor do the audiobook for it, and I was just wincing all the time. Yeah, well, I didn't write it that way. No, that's horrible. Why? I had dumb stuff. I had like he nodded his head all the time. Like that's like there's probably like 100, 200 words that could be cut out of that because that's how many times I used that. I added that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And also along the lines of connecting with an audience, how important is it for you to have sat down and you're in 10 books now of a series that hasn't even been released yet? How important for you was that to get all of that out so that it can be kind of, is that the idea, was to connect to the audience and so that they don't have to wait so long for
That's
each piece of it?
part of it. And the
Yeah.
other one is that I can go back to book one and make it look like I'm smart and set up stuff. That's the other reason. So like I was doing that, I only started I've only edited the first 3 books.
Uh-huh.
And I only started the editing process in the summer. So I had like 6 or 7 books. I had 6 books written when I started editing book 1.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to add more like name drops for places that would be coming up, or mythological characters. Mythological characters are kind of very important to the story. There's like this sort of like, so there's like, there was this war 3,000 years ago that's kind of like that's the reason that a lot of the stuff in the present is happening. And there were a lot of heroes in that. So like, that were like very heroic, and they're probably, their deeds were probably blown out of proportion, but yeah. So but their stuff. So like, but they had like fights with the dragons. So it was like the war between the dragons and everyone else. And so like, I bring back the dragons, and the dragons, who killed these dragons, who are these people they're fighting. And there were some really big, important things of like those people that were important. So I kind of wanted, and some of them I didn't develop. Like I had some developed, but then I would realize like, oh, I need like maybe another hero that could have been doing something a little different. And so, and usually they're just like evocative names, there's not a lot of flesh to them. And they're more myth these days anyway, so that's kind of fine with me. They kind of just have names like, well, let me see. There's Ishin Stonetooth, like what? Like, yeah, he's just like Ishin Stonetooth. He's very important because his sword is something my main character finds in book 1. And so he rocks most of the series with a magic sword. That's pretty cool.
Nice.
And there's like Sean of the Crystal Waters. Like, what are the Crystal Waters on it? It's it's a catchy name. Unshi's Farseer, and Shum's the Red Comet. Yeah, so he has a big axe, and they call him the Red Comet.
Sounds a little Native American in a lot of respect.
Yeah, actually, there is that. There's like the Hordmen that just kind of live. They're like, they reject civilization. They're kind of like, we spend a lot of time with them in book 3, and they're very heavily influenced by Native Americans, sort of like, because it's more like a byproduct that they're living on what's basically the Great Plains.
Sure.
So they're going to need a very like steppe sort of lifestyle, and like then the Plains Indians, the Plains Native Americans, they figured out the best ways to do that, and so there is definitely some that, and it lets me get into sort of the shamanism aspects of my magic, the more primitive aspects of it, get to explore there. And they kind of do have sort of names, but then there's also characters who are like the same race, and they come from like civilized places. So it's like some of their people decide to go, we're like piecing out on this whole civilization thing. We're going to live up here in our sacred plains, and you guys are a bunch of crazy people. And then there's other ones that are like, why are you guys living out in the plains? Like, we have like cities. It's nicer. But yeah, so there's some of that.
That's awesome. I mean, also, you in reading, you said, you've discovered some critiquing elements, but is there also an element of, because you're such a prolific writer, you're always writing stuff, you're going on to the next series, and it seems like you just go on to the next series and you go on and you go on. Is there a little bit of like reminiscing about how much you've created? Is it when you're reading, is it a time to enjoy, kind of sit back and kind of look at, hey, I made this. This is kind of cool. Is there a little bit of that when you're reading it?
I guess so. Yeah, it definitely is. It is fun. Like, going back to my first series is fun because it's very nostalgic. It's your first book. You always remember your first one, right?
Yeah.
Do I remember like the travails of writing, like,
not too reading it?
Yeah. I mean, that was like my 13th novel.
Yeah.
But like Above the Storm, yeah, I remember writing that novel. You know, and yeah, it's so it's very it feels like because I had like my editor kind of do like a read through of the first book before he put out the box set to kind of do like one more check on it. And she was like, she used to describe it like, man, it's like seeing old friends again. Is kind of how she said it when she was reading it. Because it had been like, I think like 4 or 5 years.
Family reunion.
Yeah, because it had probably been I think 4 or 5 years since she edited that.
That's cool. I like that. I mean, so by this time next year, you're gonna have like almost 40 books out. I mean, is that something that just strikes you as amazing? I mean,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
it's very like yeah, because by the end of the year I'll have 18 that are just written by they're just mine. Plus I have the 6 novellas with Michael Evan.
Yeah.
A 7th novella actually will be out by the end of the year. And so Shadow of the Dragon is going to start. We plan to start it in February of next year and do like a book a year. So yeah, it'll have like 8 of its books out, I think, by October by this time.
Wow, that's amazing, man.
Yeah, and I have most of the artwork done, so I need 3 more books to get covers done. And the artwork's just amazing. I really like looking at the artwork. It's my like background images on my desktop, and so they're very great. I've used the same artist, but like she's gotten better.
Yeah,
too. And so
that's
like,
cool too, huh?
So they're really great. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, James, I really appreciate you talking to me tonight. And it's really a pleasure to speak to you about your process, everything like that, and going deep into what you're creating and how you're creating it and how you connect it. I mean, it's really fantastic. But tell everybody where they can get these awesome books at. I mean, I have your links in the description, but tell everybody regardless and kind of give everybody a sense of what's coming next for you right off the bat.
Yeah, so you can find my books on Amazon. I'm published under James Reid. I'm on Facebook. You can find me as James Reid, or James Reid is my other page. But also my reader group is Fantastic Worlds of the Imagination. I'm on Twitter, which I mostly just use for low promotion. And yeah, that's about it. I don't do too much social media. But mostly, yeah, you'll find my books on Amazon. You search James D. Reid, you'll find me.
I highly recommend joining James's group because he does this really cool thing where he posts this weird ass picture, and you have to give him a story behind it, and it's really a lot of fun. I always gravitate to those. I love doing that stuff. So yeah, he really makes it a lot of fun. Plus, he does those readings like I talk about every week. So definitely go and check that out because you'll get a good sense of how he writes and what he thinks of how he writes. It sounds like. But James, thank you so much, man. It was a real pleasure talking to you tonight. I really appreciate it.
It's great being here.
And thanks, everybody. We'll see you again soon. In fact, actually, next week will be not this show, but a different show for us. But we'll have In Progress next week. So go check that out. And as always, we'll have stuff going on throughout the week. So check us out here at Go Indie Now. Please hit the like button, subscribe, do all that wonderful stuff. And remember that it's always time to go indie now. And with that, we'll see you again soon. Bye, everybody.